This is a video I am not sure how to start. It's one that I don't want to start, but I feel like it's one that I have to make, and I've never been in a position where I've had to make a video like this before, so I don't know exactly how it's going to go, but I'm going to try my best. If you don't know me, hi, my name is Kav. This is my booktube channel, xreadingsolacex, but today I'm not talking books, I'm talking depression. I just did a post on my Instagram and my Twitter where I essentially revealed that I have been extremely depressed since the beginning of this year, and it's something that I have kept a secret from both the booktube and from people in my personal life, and I changed all of that when I made those posts. So I'm continuing with that, and I'm talking about it here on my channel. Obviously, considering this is going to be discussing themes like depression and anxiety and mental illness and the bad that comes with that, I want to give you all a content warning. If this is the type of video you cannot handle watching right now, then please don't, because I don't want anyone to put themselves in a position that makes things harder for them. I would never want that for anyone. I'm making this video because I feel like I need to be honest with you all, since I've always believed in a policy of transparency and I have not been following that this year, and I want to change that. And I also know that people being open about their mental illness can help others in their journey. It has definitely helped me in the past, and that's what my goal is with these videos. So please only watch this if you are in a place to do so. Because this video is not scripted, I don't know exactly what I'm going to be discussing, but I will have a more in-depth list of triggers in the description after I finish filming this video, so please do check that before you watch it, and only watch it if you feel comfortable doing so. But with that said, I'm just going to start talking. I remember the exact day I got depressed again. It was the day I filmed my how to support smaller booktubers video and my why you should watch one day at a time video. And if you watch those videos, you probably wouldn't be able to tell. Maybe now that I've told you that I was in a bad place that day, if you go back and watch them you can tell, but I think that if you didn't know, you wouldn't know when you watch them. But I was sobbing for like a good half hour before I filmed those videos, and it took all of my strength to pretend to be happy, and I think that's what started all of this. And though I know that that day in January is when I got depressed again, I didn't realize that until May or so, because I didn't want to be depressed, and I tried to do everything in my power to convince myself that I wasn't, and then I did everything in my power to convince the people around me that I wasn't, and I spent all of my energy on pretending to be happy, on putting up this facade that got too tiring and too exhausting, that all it did was make my mental health that was already deteriorating even worse. Even after I figured out that I was depressed again in May, I didn't tell my psychiatrist until mid-July, so I knew for like 2 months before I told the person who was literally paid to help me deal with this. And even then, I wasn't totally honest with him about the extent of it. I made it seem like it was much less of a deal than it was, and the people who are meant to help you cannot help you until they actually know what you're going through, and they can't know what you're going through unless you tell them, because the only person who knows what you're actually going through is you. For a long time, I was angry and frustrated, and I felt betrayed because I already did my time with depression. I did my time with mental illnesses. I was depressed for 4 years straight. I tried to kill myself. I did it all already, and I thought that once it was over, it would be over. But recovery isn't linear, and you don't just get to go up. And whereas one can know that logically, it's hard to accept that, and it's hard to accept that you can go back to that bad place, because no one ever wants to go back there. And I think that's part of the reason why I didn't let myself believe I was genuinely going through something for 5 whole months, because I was so angry. I didn't want to be sad anymore. I put so much time and effort into working through all of that. And I did, and 2017 was so good for me in terms of mental health. At least it was so good. And to lose all of that after all the work I had put into it, and not just me, but my friends and family too, all the work we had all put into making me better, I lost all of that. It's been something that's been very hard for me to accept, and I've also felt very guilty in a lot of ways. I felt guilty in one sense because I feel like I've had no reason to be depressed, and that sounds horrible, and that's because it is, because that is literally not how a mental illness works. It just happens. But I think that I felt that my original depression was validated by the fact that I had been bullied, I had dealt with shit, I had dealt with so much, and that made me feel like what I was going through was valid. It made me feel like I deserved to go through it because I had been through so much. But everything in my life right now is so great that I should be happy logically. Obviously, I don't mean the greater sense of the world, because the world is constantly on fire, but in my own personal life, everything is good right now, so I shouldn't be depressed, but I am, because depression does not work like that. There are no levels of being worthy of being depressed. That's not how it works. And though I know that logically, I know that as someone who fights for mental health and who has learned about it in classes, I know that you can't always apply the things that you know to yourself, and we do this thing where we look at ourselves more critically than we look at anyone else, which I think is what has made everything this year so much harder for me, because I would never talk to another person the way I talk to myself. It's not like I've just been sad straight up since the beginning of this year. I've had good days and I've had bad days, but as we got further into the year, the good days started getting less and the bad days started getting more, and towards the end of September I just stopped having any good days. And I spent the entirety of October and the first half of November just pretending to be happy, and I spent so much time pretending to be happier than I was. And as the good days started getting less, I got a little bit more open about my depression, but not really, because I would mention being depressed to some of my friends at school, but I would make it a joke. I would make it the butt of a joke. I wouldn't actually talk about real struggles. I would just joke about being depressed, and whereas that is a coping mechanism for some, it wasn't a coping mechanism for me. It was me pretending I was being honest about my struggles when I really wasn't. Even when I would tell someone I was sad, I then wouldn't explain. I would say I'm sad, so I'm just not going to talk to anyone right now, and then I'd still continue to shut people out. The people in my life who genuinely cared about me would have to literally pry information out of me, but I would still push it as much as I could because I didn't want to let anyone in, and I still don't really want to, but I know that I need to, because I'm not going to get better as long as I keep pretending that I'm in a place that I'm not in. Depression is exhausting. It is absolutely exhausting, physically, emotionally, and mentally. And when you pretend to be happy, when you pretend to be someone you're not, for the people around you and even to an extent for yourself, it's even more exhausting because all of your energy is expended on keeping up this facade of happiness that you don't genuinely feel. It's like playing a role, but nobody benefits from it. It sucks all the life out of you. It makes it hard to do anything. I mean, even when you are depressed, it can be so hard to do simple tasks. Just going to school every day is exhausting for me, but it's even more exhausting when I try to pretend to be someone I'm not. And all of that tiredness just multiplies when you keep pretending and you have no support, when you don't allow yourself to utilize your support system. And that's what has been so hard for me. And about 2 weeks ago or so, I had an anxiety attack for the first time in like a year or something in my psych class, and instead of doing what I needed to and leaving the class, which would have been the right decision, I instead sat there and took a test through an anxiety attack that lasted an hour and a half. And I think that was the wake-up call I needed. Another thing that I have mentioned struggling with before is that I have had experience with an eating disorder, and that has only gotten worse this year because when my depression gets worse, everything else just becomes an effect of the depression. Everything else just worsens, and that has been a very big struggle for me, and it has made my days even harder, and that's still something I really struggle with talking about, so I can't really get into it because it is the thing that I deal with that is hardest for me to open up about. But I've really been struggling with that for months now. I think that when I first started talking about my mental illness, it was always something that had happened to me. When I filmed my mental illness story, it was about my mental illness that had happened. When I filmed my Draw My Life video, I made it seem like it was my journey that had happened. It wasn't me talking about something that I was dealing with at this moment. And that's why discussing my experience with my eating disorder has always been such a challenge for me, because it's never been something that had happened to me. It's always been something that I've been dealing with currently, because I've never gotten through it. I've never come out on the other side of it, and I think that discussing this as something that is currently happening to me is what makes it so hard for me to talk about, because I don't have issues talking about depression or anxiety or any of that stuff, but I don't have issues talking about it when it's something in my past. When it's something in my present and something that is likely going to be my future, it's much more challenging because it feels so much more vulnerable to be talking about it as something that is my now, not my before. It's like when you have your before and after pictures. The end of my mental illness story is my after picture, but I don't have an after here. I'm still struggling. And another thing I felt guilty about is the lack of honesty as well, because like I've said, I've always prided myself on the transparency I have in my channel, on being honest with you guys, on being open about so much of what I've dealt with, not just in terms of mental illness, but other shit that I've dealt with, just the realities of my life. And this year I really didn't do that at all. I tried to filter myself more than I normally do to paint this perfect picture of me as someone who is happy and as someone who is thriving, as someone who went through all the crap and is now out on the other side as the after picture. I tried to paint myself as the after picture, and that was not honest to my experience. It's been hard for me to finally reach a point where I can tell you guys that I've essentially been lying to you this entire year, because I hate lying so much, and anyone who knows me personally knows how much I hate lying, and I've spent this entire year doing exactly that, which breaks my heart. And it also just saddens me that I talk about being open about your mental illness, about the fact that it's not something to be ashamed of, but I was ashamed of it, and I am still in some ways ashamed of it, and I hate that because I would never look at another person and want them to feel ashamed of their mental illness. I would never look at another person and have any negative feelings about what they're going through, and I think that comes back to the fact that we are our own harshest critic, and we look at ourselves with this critical eye that we don't look at others with. I think that society conditions us to do that. Society literally profits off of women hating themselves and hating their bodies, which is so screwed up, because we're willing to create a society where people despise themselves just so that other people can benefit from it and profit from it. And I've fallen right into that, and I know that I've fallen right into that with my experience with eating, with my experience with body image. I know that I've fallen into that, but I've also fallen into that in how I look at myself in other ways now, and that's what's really challenging, because I went through all of this. And again, I think that's just what's so hard about this, because I went through all of this once and now I have to do it again, and I don't want to. And when I realized that I was dealing with depression again, I tried to decide that I didn't want to be depressed and just fix it myself, and if you know anything about mental illness, you know that that's not how it works in the slightest, because you can decide not to be depressed and that might work for about 2 days and then you'll be right back where you started because you need actual help to deal with something like this. Depression is an illness. It is caused by a chemical imbalance in your brain. It is something that needs professional help to fix, and that takes time. And that's another thing that's been so hard for me, because the people in my life have only found out in the past week or so the extent of what I've been dealing with, and to them it's like, oh, Kava's been dealing with this for like a month, so if it takes a few months to get this back on track, we're gonna be fine, it'll just take a few months. But for me, it's like I've been dealing with this for almost a year now, and I'm only now really getting started on the journey that I need to get help. So I know that it's going to take time, because you can rarely ever treat it properly on the first tries. So I have to realize that it might take more months to get through this, and that is just more time added on to the struggle I've already been dealing with this year. And that's another thing that's hard, because now it's like, if I get through it this time, what happens when it happens again? There are things in my life that I pride myself on in a way I think others don't, or there are things in my life that I value I think in a way many others don't, and I don't want to generalize because different people have different values. But for me personally, I value things like happiness and self-love so tremendously, because I know what it's like to be on the other side of those, and to fall back on them again after making it through it once is just really hard. And I feel like so much of what I'm saying is repetitive, but like I said, I don't have any sort of script for this video. I'm just talking off the top of my head, off of what I'm feeling in this moment, what I've been feeling this past month or whatever. So if it seems that way, I'm sorry, because that's how it sounds to me, but I'm just trying to be as honest as I can. I think the hardest part about all this is the again aspect, because I don't want to do it again, but also doing it again makes me feel like there's gonna be another again. I'll get through this, 2019 might be a good year, and then 2020 I'll fall back on this or something like that. It's like, if I dealt with it once and then I dealt with it twice, what's to say there won't be a third or a fourth or a fifth time? And that's just really hard to come to terms with, because I'm very young. I started dealing with depression when I was 11 or 12, and I'm only 17 now. I have an entire life ahead of me, and I don't want to consider the fact that every few years there might be another relapse of this. I think another thing that really sucks is how I've dealt with it, and I think in some ways I have dealt with it this time around better than I have the first time, because if I had dealt with it anything like the first time, my YouTube channel probably wouldn't exist anymore. But still, I fell back on some original habits I had, which was shutting people out, pretending to be happy when I'm not, putting up a facade to people outside of myself, and then coming home and crying. I think that's another hard part, because I went through an intense mental illness treatment after my suicide attempt, and in that treatment center I got a ton of tools to help myself cope for when stuff like this did happen again, and I didn't utilize them the way I could have this year, because I did use them to an extent, I think, because like I said, I haven't gone back as much as I did the first time I dealt with this. Like, it could have gone far worse than it did this year, but I still fell back on some habits that I knew weren't healthy. I could have asked for help way earlier than I did, and this year would probably have turned around much quicker had I just been honest in May when I first realized it, or even in July when I finally told my psychiatrist. I could have been more honest, because I was not honest enough. Whereas I had tools to use, I didn't use them as I should have, and that's another thing that's been hard for me to come to terms with, because I think in my mind I had always thought that if this did happen again, I had always hoped that it wouldn't, and I had always thought, you know, I did it once, I shouldn't have to do it again. But I had always hoped that in the chance that it did happen again, I would have dealt with it better, because I would know how to. And I think I also thought that if it did happen again, it would be much later in life. It wouldn't be so soon after I had first dealt with it. I had prepared myself for the fact that recovery wasn't linear, but I had prepared myself in the sense that it won't happen for another 10 years. If I relapse, it'll be like 10 years from now, and that'll give me enough time to be somewhat happy, because a year is not that long in the larger scheme of things. And I am getting help, like I alluded to. Over this past week, I have opened up about this to the people who need to know about what I'm dealing with. That is the first step I need to make, and I think this is the next step I needed to make, which is opening up about it to everyone else in my life. But I think the fact of the matter is that mental illness just sucks, and it's not something I say enough, because again, I try to paint this image of perfect positivity and hopefulness, and I do pride myself on positivity because I think it's important, but I think it's also important to acknowledge that the fact of the matter is mental illness sucks. You just have to get through it, and then sometimes you have to get through it again. But I really felt like opening up about this was the next step I needed to make for myself, because like I said, honesty and transparency between me and you is something that is very valuable to me and very important to me, and it's something I want to work more towards as we begin a new year. I don't want to put myself in the original place that I did. I don't want to fall back on bad habits when I know that I've started developing good ones, which is something I really want to work towards, and I think this is the next step I need, both for that goal and just for my recovery in general, because being open about it is something that I need in my recovery journey. Recovery for every person is different, and it is not linear. Sometimes you just have to accept that, and usually when I end a video like this that talks about mental illness or other things in my life that I've dealt with, I try to end it with some kind of positive and inspirational message, but I feel like that wouldn't be true to where I'm at right now, and I feel like that wouldn't be true to the goal of being completely honest, because that is not the place I'm in right now, but it's the place that I want to aspire to get to, and that I hope I get to by taking the right steps. So I guess what I'll say instead is thank you to those of you who have stayed with me since the beginning of all of this, and to those of you who have offered words of love and support, and just to those of you who listened to this video and who watched this video and took the time to hear me, because that really means a lot. I hope this meant something to someone out there, and that's about all for this video. Thank you to those of you who took the time to watch and listen to me. The booktube community means a lot to me. My relationship with you all means a lot to me. I can't stress that enough, so just thank you for everything you've done for me thus far. I will see you guys soon for a brand new video. Goodbye.